UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jenn Durrell.
Hey, baby.
Hey, baby.
I always love it when we have a film or TV maker on Talking Weird, and tonight's guest directed a paranormal documentary that you and I were both lucky enough to see well ahead of its very recent commercial release, when we screened it at Midwest Weird Fest in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, way back in early March. And I obviously really dug it, or I wouldn't have programmed it to screen at the festival. But what did you think about it, baby?
I thought it was really great, very insightful, and I love that it examined a number of different haunted locations, including some pretty famous ones too, like the Knickerbocker Hotel, the Hinsdale House, and the Demon of Brownsville Road. These are all three locations I would love to investigate.
I know you would, but I've got to say those places would creep me out.
You can just stick with me. I'll protect you.
Anyway, back to our guest this week. He's a film professor and the director of television and film arts at SUNY Buffalo State. He's also a filmmaker in his own right, and his new paranormal documentary, There's No Such Thing as Ghosts, is now available on most streaming platforms. So, I'm delighted to welcome to the show Aaron Daniel Annis. So, something that I find curious is I know that your background isn't in the paranormal, or originally wasn't even in film. You were in theater originally, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong. And then you moved into film. But what made you decide to do a documentary feature on the supernatural or on ghosts?
Well, I've always had a love for the topic, and I grew up, in a home where my parents had two different opinions about the paranormal. When you're a little kid, you always want to be reassured there's no such thing as ghosts, and so my dad would always say, "Yeah, there's no such thing as ghosts, don't exist, go to bed," and my mom would never answer the question. And I always wondered why two people with very similar cultural backgrounds, religious beliefs, so much of their backgrounds were the same. How could they have two different beliefs when it comes to the paranormal? And that kind of stuck with me. And I moved to Buffalo, New York from California, and I didn't find California was the best soil to plant this film because so much of it's so new. I mean, there's plenty of haunted stories of Hollywood and whatnot, but it just didn't feel like the right place. And when I moved to Buffalo, everything here is old. People reuse the same homes and the same architecture, and there's so much history. And I read this book called 500 Years, A History of Ghosts, which is just a book that kind of goes back to some of our beginning ideas of ghosts throughout the years and how things were and ideas were developed. And I found the seance was invented just an hour and a half from where I live. And so as I read more, I thought, man, I'm in a place where I could explore something that I'm so interested in. Why not just go as somebody that doesn't know anything other than the average Joe and explore this? And so I started into it just as a blank slate and went into it blind.
The Fox sisters were from your part of the world, is that right? That's where spiritualism comes from as well, if I'm correct.
That's exactly right, yes.
Yeah, the burned over district of New York was loaded with all kinds of weird and wonderful ideas and paranormal goings on. So when you made the film, and we'll get into it in a minute because it's such an interesting documentary, but I'm curious to know if it changed you or if it changed your beliefs or the way that you view the paranormal.
Yeah, I think everybody that I talk to about this film, that's one of the things that I get asked so much is, are you a believer now or a disbeliever now? But I like the phrasing, has it changed you? I think that the thing that's changed maybe the most is I'm less frightened of the paranormal than I was before I started making the film. So that's probably the biggest change. I was always open to the idea of the paranormal. I had personal experiences growing up. And so I wasn't a disbeliever. I also have a religious background. I have Christian beliefs in my religious background. So obviously that means I believe in the supernatural. And so I came into it believing in the supernatural. I actually made sure that I had a team of people with different beliefs than myself. I brought an atheist, a Jewish person. I mean, it sounds like a joke but myself, and then a spiritualist. I made sure that I had a crew that was made up of people with different religious backgrounds, because I didn't want to be so biased. I wanted to really be able to listen to my subjects. And I also made sure that at the end of each interview, I let each person on the crew ask a question to the subject, because maybe they have a question that I didn't even have their perspective to ask. So at the end of it all, I guess, I still things happened during our filming, and I do believe that there is more than the natural that we know. And I'm less frightened because I spent so many hours interviewing these subjects, and I didn't want to make a ghost hunting film. It's just we were staying in these places and at these places, so I had to show what we captured. And I think that because you spend a lot of time, like I have hundreds of hours of footage, and things don't happen every second. And I guess my thought is, if things don't happen every second, then when I turn out the lights in a room at night, there's no reason for me to be afraid of the dark, because if something happens, that's a phenomenon that's pretty cool that I got to experience, rather than something that's like out to get me, is kind of how my feelings changed,
No, I appreciate the fact that you took on board different belief types within the documentary. It's interesting to see the skeptics and the people that seem to walk a road in between. And I didn't know that your background was one of a Christian, and I certainly appreciate that, because mine is as well. And I tend to also try not to let that always impact the way that I look at the paranormal. As listeners know, I'm very influenced by John Keel and Patrick Harper and Jacques Vallée and people like that. But it is difficult for me not to look at the spirit world. And this is sometimes a point of friendly contention between Jen and myself, to look at it a little bit differently, and often look at it through a Christian lens, where I tend to be reluctant to accept that people are having contact with spirits of the dead, while I'm far more open to the idea in a Christian sense that it's demonic potentially, or in a Keelian sense that it's some type of ultra-terrestrial intelligence playing tricks on us and just manifesting as what we expect it to be. Do you have a take on that kind of outlook on the paranormal?
I guess I would start off saying, as someone who has a Christian background starting this film, there are a lot of people with Christian beliefs that feel it's just horrible to step into the world of the paranormal. And I'm not mocking those people, because I have family members that felt the same way as I went into this film. And some of those people look at it as if everything is either a demon or an angel, or a demonic presence, or a heavenly presence, or something that's not, I guess, what we generally consider a ghost. And I was open to that idea as well. But my goal at making this documentary was to listen to, what other people thought, because I already know what I think. So I really wanted to hear other people's opinions. So I came into it with the thought that, because I believe that when we die, we have a part of us that continues. And even though from a Christian belief, it continues in maybe a heaven or a hell or another place, I think that since it does continue, I don't know the rules. I don't know the rules of what does that mean? And is there more than one part of us that continues? There's the soul, but is there a reflection of us that, an energy that can, I don't know. And I don't claim to be smart enough to know. And that I'm ignorant when it comes to, I think we all are pretty ignorant in the science of what happens after we die. And so I guess I would say that I think I came in open to the idea that there could be something I don't know about that did not contradict my beliefs. And I still believe there are things that I don't know about that don't contradict my beliefs. I've not thought about it from an extraterrestrial point of view. However, I'm considering my next film being There's No Such Thing as E.T. Because I've decided why not start exploring that world as somebody, because I didn't know that there was this community, which you're a part of. And when I started exploring the world of the paranormal, I just thought I was going to go to these individuals and learn about their, I took out a radio ad during Coast to Coast on the AM station. I took out a radio ad asking if people had felt like they were being haunted to write me, and then they may be in my film. And I just blindly stepped into this. And so I think that now that I've met this world and realized that it's so connected, it's this small, huge world of people. And when you get into it, it's like you all of a sudden are in a community that is actually like a neighborhood that you live in simply because you chose to step into it. And those friendships and relationships in this community are strong. There's also like a lot of infighting in the family, I've noticed, but I've really enjoyed that experience. And I am interested. I've seen this parallel universe of those that explore the ideas of UFOs and extraterrestrials. And so that's probably my next step, is to explore your thoughts of, are these manifestations of something that's otherworldly, but maybe not other dimension, or maybe is other dimension.
You are coming at it from a very interesting angle as somebody who is outside of the belief system with inside either ET believers or inside of paranormal investigators. And I think that's probably a healthy way to approach making such a film. But while we're talking about the demonic that we were a moment ago, I'll be honest, one of the most, I suppose, impressive stories I thought in the documentary is Bob Cranmer's The Demon House of Brownsville Road story, where he and the Catholic Church thought that his house was demon possessed. Is that a story you could tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, his story was super interesting. I heard about his story from someone else that lived near. He's from the Pittsburgh area, and I was following up on a lead that was outside of Pittsburgh, and that lead had just finished reading his book. And as I was talking to her about her experiences, she said, "Well, have you read the book, The Demon House of Brownsville Road?" So I immediately bought the book and read it, and it basically is this narrative telling of what happened to Bob moving into this house that he purchased. When things started out in this house, they thought maybe it was families, their family was kind of tricking each other. There was this chain on a light in the closet. And when you pulled the chain, if you let a pull chain light go, that chain can pop up and maybe wrap around the light. Well, his whole experience started in this closet, the coat closet. Every evening when he would go to hang his coat up, this little chain would be wrapped around the light. And he knew that he had left that chain where it was. And so he told his wife, he said, "Please stop ripping that chain to where it wraps around the light. It's so frustrating." And she said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And so they did this little experiment. This is right after they moved in, and they hung a little weight on the chain, and he pulled the light and he left the weight there and he shut the door. And when he opened the door, the chain was wrapped around the light, and he realized, okay, this is not just a normal everyday occurrence. And from that small thing, larger and larger things started happening, both, I would say, emotionally to the family. I mean, there were some experiences that weren't physical manifestations, but then there were also, it eventually things were flying across the room and crashing into walls, and all sorts of, the wallpaper bled, the walls bled. He actually showed me the wallpaper with the stains, and he had the stains analyzed. He sent them to a lab, and they couldn't identify what the liquid was, but they could find organic compound. They couldn't rule out that there were traces of blood in this liquid. He kept having more and more. Well, he was a Baptist at the time, and many of you may not know what the Baptist background is, but there's not really what's called there's not an exorcism in the Baptist church. And he was trying to figure out, what do I do? Because this house is crazy, and it became very unfriendly what was happening. They were being harmed, and they were I think I can say this. I know I'm stumbling because I'm not sure what I can say, but I think I can say this because he put some of this in his book. Members of the family ended up having to be institutionalized for a while after the book was written. And since the book was written, right before I interviewed Bob, he had lost his son to suicide. So there was a lot of emotional trauma that I'm not saying is all a result of this experience, but there was a lot of emotional trauma. And so they turned to the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church, he told me, you take whatever medicine cures your sickness, and the Catholic Church had a method for it. What he didn't realize is that the Catholic Church, and these are his words, I'm not an expert on the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church has what's called an intuitive, which is basically a psychic. And the Catholic Church put him in touch with this intuitive who he spoke with on the phone, who told him things about what was happening in his house and said, "There are bodies buried in your yard." And these bodies were massacred in the French and Indian War. And this is probably, one of the starts to this massacre on your land probably attracted this evil because it was very brutal. And he had radar brought out and had the grounds where the intuitive suggested through the phone that these bodies were. And they actually found the bodies buried under a tree.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so I mean, this person on the phone who never even had been to the house, and she told him many other things about the house and about what was happening without ever meeting him. And she felt that she did not want any notoriety. She doesn't go out and do this, but she felt that her calling was to be this intuitive that helps the church deal with these types of situations. And so working with her and working with priests and the archbishop and people that came in, They would have regular mass in the house and had the final battle ended up in the basement of their house. But it was intense. And he showed me crucifixes that would bend around his neck, and they're still bent. I have them on camera. He showed me pictures that he caught. I had an atheist with me, my director of photography. He was a Catholic, growing up, but now he's turned to atheism. I can't say that completely because he also is open to this idea of a shared consciousness. He felt when we walked away from this interview, he said, that's the most convincing person that we've talked to so far for, someone that was very much against anything paranormal happening. He was kind of a little bit in shock after we left that interview.
Oh,
As I mentioned, I think that was the one that probably most impressed me, and there were many others of interest. That intuitive story is interesting as well. There's an idea for a narrative feature horror movie instead of The Exorcist, The Intuitive.
Yeah.
Oh, it's true. It's true.
But as far as I understand, his house had been cleared by a number of masses and exorcisms and the like, so I'm guessing that house itself didn't leave you with any feelings or a sense of a presence or menace or strangeness, but was there a particular location when you were filming that you really felt there was something in there?
Yeah, you're right. That house, it felt very calm. He said they have echoes every once in a while of things, but it felt very calm. I didn't feel anything that felt weird to me at that house. The Knickerbocker Hotel, which is in Pennsylvania, in the Erie area of Pennsylvania, when I walked into that hotel, and it was late at night when I first got there, and I probably spent more nights over the 4 years we filmed in that hotel than any other location. But from the moment I walked into that hotel, it just felt like it felt like there were a lot of people in the hotel. When you go into a place that's just packed and that feeling of a really full building, that's how it felt when I walked into the Knickerbocker Hotel. And this hotel is not in operation. Peg Knickerbocker, who owns it, she sometimes rents it for events, but it's basically an empty hotel. She collects antiques. Every room is full of antiques. She keeps the whole hotel full of these antiques. People give her haunted dolls, and she loves dolls, and she believes dolls aren't evil and that she can show them love and they don't have, and so she gets all of these things and collects them. And she lives in a little apartment that her and her husband built in the bottom corner of the hotel. She lives in this apartment in a big empty hotel by herself. And when I went there, it did not feel empty. And that was probably the most energized place that I felt. Not necessarily menacing. I didn't really feel a menacing presence there, but it felt just alive when I walked into the hotel.
Didn't you have a crew member that had a dream about?
Oh,
yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. Maybe even before I talk about that crew member,
Okay.
The first day we walked into that hotel, I had a crew member, and he was actually I'm a professor for film and television, and so I took on an intern who I ended up bringing in as an actual crew member. And when he was setting up in this location, he was unloading equipment, and I was on the third floor is where we were setting up. So we were all carrying things up to the third floor, no elevator. It's an old hotel. Mm-hmm. And he saw me up on the third floor through the grand staircase, and he saw me walk out into the hallway, set something down, and walk into a room across the hallway. So he went up to carry the equipment and meet me there, and none of us were actually up there. So he saw none of us, but he thought that it was me because he actually watched a physical form walk out, set something in the hallway, and walk across. And this was before we even started interviewing at the location. And so it was a very charged first evening at this hotel because that crew member had this completely unexpected experience right away. And we went back several times. And when we were back for one of the last times, one of my audio recordists, his name's Matt, Peg always chooses the rooms. The owner of the she's such an interesting person. It's almost like the way that Michelle Desrosiers, who's in the film, she's also in a lot of paranormal television. I believe she's in a show called Paranormal Survivor pretty often. But she's a super person, and we were working with her. She did the spirit box session in the film. She considers Peg a lightning rod for things that are otherworldly or different. And I will say that she's the most amazing, sweet person that you'll meet, but she has this presence, this thing about her that you can feel. And one of the things that she likes to do whenever you come to the hotel is she chooses your room that you stay in. And usually it's a different room each time you go. And Matt was put in this room. I call it the doll room. It's this room with this little bed and a whole lot of dolls that she's collected. And it was a full time because she was having a big birthday celebration. And for her birthday, she has all of these people from the paranormal world who are her close friends come. And we all, now I go and we spend the night and we just celebrate together. And so it was a kind of packed floor, and he slept in this room. And the next day he said, I need to tell you about a dream I had. So I just said, well, let me turn on my camera because who knows what you're going to say. And he told me that he dreamed that he saw this old man sitting beside his bed. And the old man didn't talk to him a lot, but he conveyed that he didn't understand what cell phones were for. And so he just basically explained to this old man in his dream sitting beside his bed what a cell phone was for and, why we have them. And the old man just listened to him and they just had this conversation. And he said it felt like he really had just been visited by this person in the night. And he said he couldn't even he said it just felt so weird because it felt so real. And this crew member also is a non-believer in the paranormal. And so when he told me that, I mentioned it to Peg, and she's done so much research on the hotel. She wanted to do a photo lineup of possible people who had lived in the hotel. And so she sorted these pictures in a cell phone where you could swipe through them. And she wanted Matt to look through these pictures and see if he saw the person who visited him. Well, I actually don't even mention this little tidbit in the film, but as Matt's swiping through those pictures, he chooses the person who looks most like the person that he saw. And when he shows it to Peggy, it was her father. It was her dad. And she actually hadn't put that picture in the lineup. It was just the picture after the pictures that she was having him swipe through. And I didn't say this in the film because it just didn't, fit with what I was, I just didn't include it because it just didn't fit. But he swiped past those pictures and chose the picture of her father and said, this is who it reminds me of or who I can most compare it to. And Peg remembered that her father always told her as he was dying, he said, I'll see you at the Nick. I'll see you at the Nick. And so she felt like, he never said we would talk at the Nick. He said he would be watching me and seeing me. And maybe he's here and maybe he's here and just visited this person that's visiting me.
Mm-hmm. Peggy seemed to also have a number of other spirits who'd moved on or relatives of hers who had passed that seemed to come and visit the Knickerbocker, because the film ends with a rather powerful story of hers about a plank of wood with a message on it falling to the ground.
Yeah, I remember when her brother died of cancer while we were filming, and she sometimes when she's processing things, she's interested in social media, and she'll do a live video just to say her thoughts. And she did a Facebook live video to talk about what happened. She was and she actually did this immediately after it happened. She has a big storage room where she stores a lot of the decorations for the hotel. And she heard this thud. And as she walked into that room, she found this piece of wood on the ground, and it had a message on it. And it said free. And she, at the time that this happened, her brother's funeral was happening, and she couldn't bring herself to go to the funeral. She was just so upset. She just stayed at the hotel to clean. So during the funeral, while she's cleaning by herself, she gets this message that says free, and she felt it was her brother telling her, I'm free. You don't have to worry about me. And it was such a beautiful moment. And she shared it with everybody on her social media. So when it popped up, I waited a while, and then I wrote her and I said, Peggy, can I take this video that you've posted on your personal page and include it in the film? And it actually ended up being the ending of the film. And, I don't want to obviously say tell you every story in the film, but I think that when you listen to her actual words and you hear the emotion, it spoke to me. It speaks to you no matter what you believe of how impactful the unknown and the possibilities of the unknown are on our emotions and on our outlook on life.
So what about the Hinsdale House? I know it's pretty well known. So when you went there, were you really anxious to be there?
The most scared that I've been the entire time I did this film was at the Hinsdale House. And one of the reasons is because it was our first on location shoot that we did. And all 4 years of filming was at the Hinsdale House. So as our first location, every horror movie that you've ever seen started the same way as our filming at the Hinsdale House started.
Oh, wow.
We took a trip down there, and I actually had cameras in the car as we were heading down. So there's some footage of that in the film. But this is not in the film because we didn't have the cameras rolling. So let me tell you this first moment of arriving at the Hinsdale House. We pull in, and the owner, Daniel Class, is not at the house yet. We got there a little bit early, and there's a groundskeeper. There's this groundskeeper at the house, just like in a movie that you would watch. And he's outside working, and he meets us as we get out of the car at this empty house. And this was very early on. The Hinsdale House is super well known now. It was well known before because there was a book written about the house by the daughter of the family that had a lot of experiences, decades ago. But he purchased this house. Daniel Class purchased this house because he wanted a place that was supposed to be or rumored to be active to do research for the paranormal. So he had recently purchased the home when we went for our first filming there. And this groundskeeper meets us as we're getting, and I'm with another professor from Buffalo State, Dr. Ruth Goldman. She was my audio recordist for that first location. And we both get out of the car, and this groundskeeper walks up to us and he says, I would not go in that house if I were you. He said, I don't go into the house, and I would not be confident that something wouldn't leave with me if I did go in that house. And he told us that, and then he just walked away and eventually just disappeared into whatever he was doing and left. And so we got this warning from the groundskeeper. And that was our first experience, was this groundskeeper came and warned us that he would never go in that house. So as he kind of disappears, we start opening our equipment and unloading. And the owner, Dan, who's great, Dan Class, he comes and he says, yeah, the house is yours, set up, and let us know when you're ready to interview us. And so I wanted to know what the most active room in the house was, and it was one of the former occupants, the children, one of her bedroom up in the corner upstairs. They thought it was a portal to other places, and so I said, Ruth, why don't you go upstairs and set a microphone up there? Let's just set a Marantz, which is an audio recorder. Let's set it recording with a really great mic and just leave it recording during all of our setup and everything so that we can have some type of sample. And Ruth said, there is no way that I'm going to that house unless you're walking in there with me. So we walked in together, and we went up to this room, and we were super tense. We set up the microphone, and it was just a strange feeling. And I know it was because I was charged, and this was my first time ever doing something like this on purpose, seeking out answers about the paranormal. So emotionally, I know that it was a big deal. We ended up going to that house multiple times. There was one, which I'll let it be in the film, but there was an experience that happened in the house that was pretty insane, where we got responses to some questions we asked from nobody that was living in the house.
Oh, wow. Well, doesn't the land also have a portal on it? Isn't there like a theory that the whole grounds and the house is just like several different portals? Did they talk about that?
You're exactly right. We went into the woods. So there is a woods behind the house, and there's also a pond on the grounds. And we went with Heather Reese. She's a medium. She's a clairaudient psychic. And she allowed us to follow her and her crew on an investigation. And we went with her into the woods. And she said that she heard and saw even guardian angels lining the edge of the woods. And she said, when you see angels, they mean business. There's a reason. And she said that these angels are standing guard to keep things from exiting the woods to the grounds of the house. And she said that they told her that that's what they're there for, was to keep guard because there are some menacing or evil presences in the woods. We went there in the daylight hours, but we did not go in there after dark into the woods. So it was definitely interesting. There's this part of the woods where there's just this whole section of dead trees. And you can see almost like a separation between the living trees and the dead trees. And it's this really kind of weird presence. And someone had mentioned that there may be some Native American burial grounds in those woods. I don't know. I spoke with a historian of the land, and I don't know. I honestly don't have the answer if there are or if there aren't. But she believes that there are Native American burial grounds that maybe some of that property is built over. There's also talk that there was this young man murdered on the property, or I don't know if he was killed or if he died in this accident with a saw and that where he died is now the pond. It used to be land, and now it's the pond. And so they believe that there's been some strange deaths that have happened that maybe aren't ordinary circumstances that have caused some strange things to be happening on the property.
Mm-hmm.
The basement's super freaky. Dan, our first time there, took us into the basement, which is not something that I think a lot of people go down into. And it is one of those old stone basement dirt floors.
Yeah.
And it was super, super, super creepy. As a matter of fact, I cut a little short. I didn't have room in the film to put it in, but there was a spirit box session that was done there. His spirit box was my first experience with a spirit box, which they believe allows the dead to communicate. And they asked how many people were in the basement just to kind of get evidence that it was intelligent responses. And when I listened back, it sounded like they said the exact number of people that were, including my crew and the people down there. They said that number. So that was a super interesting moment for me. My first time experiencing that. I cut a little short of that and put it on our Facebook page so that people could see it.
Oh, that's cool. I'll have to take a look at that. I've also noticed, because I've watched a lot of footage of the Hinsdale House, is how it likes to drain individuals so much that, they want to lay down and take a nap. Did you or anyone in your crew experience that?
This is super weird. I've never met you, Jen. I don't know anything about you. But I'm going to probably get in trouble for telling the story. But this is super strange that you said this.
Yeah.
I've never talked about this to anybody, and I did not know that was something that had been said before.
Oh.
So our director of photography, he would get super mad at me for telling this story. But our first evening of investigation, we're upstairs, and granted, it was super hot in summer. There was no air conditioning up there. At least it wasn't when we went. But we were doing an EVP session, or the group was, and I was filming it, and I heard this noise, and I turned my night vision camera, and he was sound asleep and snoring upstairs, like we were filming in a session, and the director of photography was sound asleep out of nowhere. Wow. And I just made a joke about it, and he wanted me to never tell anyone that happened because he's super professional. I obviously didn't hold it against him because I know he's super professional. But it's super interesting that you say that, because that happened. And downstairs, one of our crew fell asleep during a session that we were shooting, and that did not happen at other locations. And I just kind of wrote it off because I'd never heard that before. But that happened. We also, and I know this is very common for a lot of people, but we also had so many battery changes during our interviews. Our batteries would just die and die and die. But that's super interesting that you say that, because our very, very qualified, very professional crew, we had people just fall asleep in the Hinsdale House during our filming sessions.
Yeah, that's crazy. Do you feel that house, I don't know how to explain it, maybe has emotions of its own, to where it's not really its own person, but it has its own consciousness?
Yeah, the house made noises and you're dragging everything out of me. But the house,
sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, the house, they were asking questions in the house, and the responses came from noises coming from the walls or the floor or the boards of the house. So, I mean, it definitely, and I try to stay on the line because I really don't know all the answers, and I don't claim to, but definitely we had responses that came from noises that sounded like they were made by the house when there was no one else on the property other than the people that were in the room, and the noises were coming from outside of the room.
Oh, wow. Earlier, we talked about you having experiences when you were younger. Do you want to talk about any of those? Did you have any very interesting ones?
Yeah, they were personal. They weren't scary as much as just personal. I was very close with my grandfather, and my grandfather had to have his legs amputated when we were when we were young. He was a strong man. He was an upholsterer, and so he had very strong arms. And so for the rest of his life, he would have like monkey bars over his bed. He would swing himself in and do those things. Would just use his arms. I was really close with him, and when he was dying, I was staying at the house, and I'm from the South, so I called my grandma Meemaw, and my Meemaw woke me up in the night and said, "Papa's passing, come back." And so I walked back with her, and I stood with her and watched him take his last breath. And then I sat with his body until they took it away, and while she called the family. And I was just so close with him. A few nights later, I was back at my family's home, my parents' home, and I was sleeping in bed. I was in high school. I was maybe a junior in high school. And I always love to sleep with the black, dark. I love cold, dark spaces. And it was black, dark. And I was rolled on my side facing the wall. And you know, when you get really, really scared and you feel like that liquid heat rise up from your feet, like all the way up your body.
Yes.
I had that feeling. I got so out of nowhere. I just felt this liquid wave of heat go over my body. And I felt so scared. And this voice in my head, not an out voice, but this voice in my head just said, you know, don't be scared. It's just Papa. And I felt this peace. And as I started to feel this peace, this hand laid on my shoulder, and it was he had very strong, thick hands, and I felt his hand on my shoulder, and it physically rolled me over. It grabbed my shoulder and it rolled me onto my back, and I felt an embrace, a hug. And for that to happen, the being hugging me would have had to have been standing over me, and he didn't have legs for years before he died. But I felt someone bend over me and just embrace me. And it felt just perfect, like perfect peace, and perfect security. And that experience will always be with me. That was it. And then it just, I went to sleep. But that was a super unique and special experience. And I remember it. You can say it's a dream, you can say it's something, but whatever it was, I remember it, and I was there. So that was an experience that kind of let me glimpse something different than the ordinary.
Yeah. So what did that make you feel afterwards? I mean, I've had experiences like that myself, to where I'm dead asleep. And the next thing I know, I've got like this huge embrace, and it feels like this euphoria almost. There's no stress. Right. Everything's gone. And it's just this amazing feeling. And it's really hard to explain. And it's a hug. I felt a hug, and it was from my grandmother. She says, "You were such a great granddaughter." There's no inflection in the voice. It's just a straight, plain voice. It sounds like somebody that you know, but it's not. I don't know. It's just so calming, very calming experience. But did that change you any after you felt that, though, about life after death?
I mean, I think it reassured me. When you're a kid, you believe whatever people tell you to believe, and then you get to that high school age where you start to question everything and realize that there are gray areas. And then I think you get past. I believe that as you're leaving high school, going into either college or work, that's when you can't help but question everything for most people, because you know there's gray, because you see all the gray. And I think that as I'm first seeing the gray, as at that age, I had some of the gray colored in by definition, by experiencing something that helped answer some of those questions that I was starting to have.
There's a wonderful contrast in the film between two of the subjects, and I won't talk about too many more stories because I don't want to spoil the whole film. And this will be my last on-screen specific question.
Okay.
But one is the famous skeptic Joe Nickell, who talks about how when your brain dies, just as you need your brain in life to function, surely you need that as any kind of consciousness. So when it's gone, it's gone. But then there's a wonderful moment by, I think his name's Lou Rera. He's a horror author that you have in the film. And he talks about how he's seen people pass and how there's something intrinsically different in the human face from that moment of that last breath to when it's gone. And there's something which really struck me about those two different perspectives about what happens when somebody dies. Like maybe something does move on, or the other theory is it's just the end. I think that somehow, to me at least, almost captured that intrinsic difference between people who believe in life after death and people who don't believe in life after death.
Yeah, thanks for kind of pointing out and catching those contrasts. I agree with you. I guess I would first say that anyone, or at least from my perspective, anyone who has watched someone take their last breath, I don't know how you can't help but see. And, maybe if you don't believe in an afterlife, you believe that's just the physical difference between life and death. But when I watched my grandfather take his last breath, and as I sat with his body, it felt like he was dissolving into a shell, like he was becoming this, like the butterfly had left and the cocoon was still there. It felt like that. And from the moment that he took his last breath, there was, I guess I could say, humanity or something that just disappeared that is so weird that you could be looking at the same form, but that's not there anymore. And Lou, what's interesting about Lou, and he is a great author, by the way, but when I first did my, a lot of times I'll talk with someone on the phone or talk with them in person to try to talk them into trusting me enough to go on camera. And I knew Lou before because he was also a professor. And so I had a relationship with him. And I always knew him as a complete disbeliever. He's a horror, which I always felt was so fascinating, that he wrote great horror and he believes nothing about, that there is no paranormal. That's how I knew him. And so when we sat down together and I realized that he never had told me that it was an absolute fact, he just didn't know if there was or not. And so he chose to say, well, I don't know of any evidence. And as I talked with him more, and especially as I listened to him in that room that was at the Hinsdale House that he talked about watching people pass away. He lost his first wife to cancer. And he talked about the fact that it seemed like they had moved on. And he talked about how he really wanted to know or wanted to think that they were still existing in some fashion or form. But he just had no answers. He said he tried to will for something to happen and will for communication. And he was so afraid of just forgetting how this person spoke and how they were. And he had a voice message. We talk about this in the film. He had a voice message on his phone from her. And he wanted to try to transfer that to save because, back before our smartphones, we had to use a cable to transfer the recording. And he had transferred the recording. And then he talks about in the film that one day in the middle of the daylight, he's walking into his house and he hears his wife right behind him just say his name, like she's just walking in behind him. And he turns around and she's not there. And he said, I don't know what it is. I don't know that there's anything else after this, but I know that was her voice. And I know that I heard it, and whatever you may call it, if it's some type of hallucination or something, an audio hallucination, great. He said, that's fine, but I heard it and it happened. And so I don't know what it is. And if you watch that part in the film, when he tells us that, I tried to really take a close shot of his face because I learned so much more from looking at his eyes and his mouth and what he was doing with his face and even what he was saying. It was almost as if he was processing and realizing that, and maybe he always knew this, but he was revealing to the camera, maybe subconsciously, that this was so impactful and so real that maybe he questions everything. And he would be the first to tell you he doesn't know the answers and he's open to whatever life shows him.
I think he's one of the most fascinating figures in there. And it's interesting that you brought up your use of the camera with him, because there are a number of times where there's almost a profound existential sadness or something captured on Lou's face. And it's almost that in some of the things that Peg talks about are these moments of incredibly deep realizations of humanity, I think, and some of the most essential parts of who we are and our belief in or unbelief in life after death. And I think that's some of the real strengths actually in your film. As much as all of the paranormal goings on are interesting, it somehow manages to go above and beyond a standard paranormal documentary and look at those questions. Sometimes just, you're right, in the look of somebody that you've captured or in the sadness in somebody's eyes about what really is the ultimate question most of us don't really want to face, but what does happen after we die?
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Dean. I think that every documentary filmmaker has to choose what their own definition of truth is, because there are so many definitions of truth. And, documentary film is supposed to be truth. I worked in the industry. I was a reality television editor for a while, and I promised my subjects this would be no reality television. This would be an honest documentary film. And many of these subjects had been in reality television. Some had been harshly burned in the public's eyes through reality television, because reality television is often, I call it narrative truth. We make it up, or I did. When I was an editor, I made it up. And I think that when I was working with this film, I had to decide, how am I going to cut this? Whose point of view am I going to show? I don't know the answers. This film is a search for answers. I'm not trying to prove anything, because why would I be able to prove something that no one's proved for centuries, right? So I just need to figure out what are some answers, what are some truths that I can learn and that I can share through my time on this. And in the cutting room, I also edited this film as I was going through these hundreds of hours of film, trying to decide what perspective I was going to use. I decided that the best way for me to tell these stories would be if I could show the truth of the subject. So the subject's truth. Because why would I believe that my opinion or idea is more accurate than somebody else's? So each story that I tell, and there are 4 stories in this that are kind of intermingled, 3 major stories. Each story that I tell, my goal was to tell it from the perspective of the person that was talking to me. So I tried to show everything from their point of view. I had someone on my crew say, I hope you're going to prove that this person's a phony. Maybe there's a camera an angle here where you see muscles in this person's wrist moving that's making this crystal move or whatever. And he's a nice person, and he didn't mean anything mean by it. He just really felt that like the way to be truthful would be to prove that this person is fake. And I thought about that, and it's not invalid for him to think that, but I thought, I bet if I had a camera angle of this person's wrist moving as this crystal was moving over this board, and I showed it to this person, that person would say, well, yeah, that's spirit. Like actually that's how spirit's controlling this crystal, right? I'm sure that there would be an answer from that. I'm sure there's infinite answers from depending on your point of view. So as I thought about that, I decided, I'm going to show the truth from each subject and from their point of view. And I want everyone to feel that their truth has been shown. And the way I can be fair is by showing the truth of people with different ideas, such as skeptics or scientists or religious, people that are from religious perspectives. And so that was my goal, is to show each subject's truth, not my truth.
And talking about the things you captured or didn't capture on camera, I know it's often probably difficult to capture those paranormal moments, although there are some great points in the film which tend to show things that can't be rationally explained. Were there things that you almost captured or didn't quite capture, or things that you couldn't include just because the footage didn't tell the story adequately enough?
Yeah, one of the really cool things to me, and I hate it, I had it in the film, and I decided to cut it because, I believe I don't want my film to be boring. I want to leave you wanting more. But I cut this from the film, and I've actually told the person I'm getting ready to tell you about that I would try to get her a copy of the rough footage. The Knickerbocker Hotel hosted, there's this event that takes place every year called the World's Largest Ghost Hunt. And the belief in this World's Largest Ghost Hunt is that if a lot of people focus on communicating with the other world or other worlds at the same time, maybe just the fact that so many people are focused at the same time to do this could cause there to be more likelihood of experiencing phenomenon. And so the Knickerbocker Hotel was satellite, one of the places where they were doing this World's Largest Ghost Hunt that's all connected via internet and videos. And as I was filming, the town had sent a journalist from the local TV station, because it happens in the fall, and all news stations want to cover something paranormal in the fall because of Halloween. Well, they sent a journalist out to cover it for the nightly news. And the journalist, because she also did film work, we got to talking, and she said, yeah, I don't believe in any of this, but this is my job. I'm covering this. I'm happy to get to see new places. And I brought my daughter with me because she thinks this is super cool and she gets to experience this ghost hunt. And so she had her daughter with her. But the journalist had a press pass, super nice person. And I said, you guys are going to go upstairs with a medium that they have here, and you're gonna go try to communicate with the medium. Why don't I give you one of my night vision cameras and let you carry that up with you? Just one, you'll be able to see more in the dark, and 2, maybe you'll capture something interesting for me. And so I just handed them one of our cruise cameras and sent them off because everybody broke up into different areas of the hotel. So later that night, the journalist came to me and handed me the camera and said, could you find this time code and play it back for me? And I said, yeah, why? And she said, well, I saw this light come from the side of the room, and it went up onto the bed, over to the middle of the bed, and then it went up the wall into the center of the wall and through the wall. And I said, well, let me just tell you that sometimes night vision cameras, because of the way they work, the infrared reflects off of dust, and you'll see a particle move and you'll think that's a light. And she said, no, you don't understand. That's what I saw with my naked eye. I want to see if the camera caught it. And so I said, okay. And so I went to the time code that she said, and because her daughter was shooting with the camera and she was just sitting there watching. And all I had on the camera at the moment she said is I didn't have that whole experience, But at the moment she said, I see this like light start to appear in the center of the room and then disappear through the wall. And it just caught like it's almost like it caught like a dim version of what she said. And so it was so interesting because I turned all my, I actually set up a camera and lighting for her and interviewed her on her experience because she's a total skeptic and she had seen with her naked eye this happen. And I had at least partial, evidence on this camera because we can see this light appear and go through the wall in the camera. And I knew from interviewing Peg that where that wall used to be the door. That used to be the door out of that room that the light had gone through. And I already knew that from discussing the house with Peg. And so that was super interesting. And her phone went crazy. Her phone started doing all sorts of weird things. And so she had a life-changing experience in some ways. Even though it was small, it changed her mind a little bit about things. And we've kept in touch since then. And so I had cut that whole incident into the film, but I ended up not being able to include it for time.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to your next doco as well. There's no such thing as ET, so you have to keep us posted into how your research is going on that. And hopefully, I know how long the film process takes, but hopefully you'll have that done in a year or two and we'll be able to have you back on, because it was fascinating to pick your brain and see your actual approach to making such a wonderful documentary, because as I said, there's no such thing as ghosts really. Does something different to most paranormal documentaries. In fact, all paranormal documentaries that are out there today.
Yeah.
That would be great. Thank you so much for saying that.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on the show.
It was so interesting. I know that you also work in film there and with a lot of filmmakers. And I had on my social media page, someone commented about experiencing a film with you or where you are. And it was super great to see what a great reputation you have where you are and to get to hear how you're influencing media and media on this topic, especially where you are. So I appreciate what you're doing, to let people like me who, I don't think of myself as this paranormal community guy that's grown up in this community, but there's a lot to learn from this community and a lot to think about that affects so many parts of our lives. And I think that you doing something like this allows a forum for people to think about those ideas.
I thought Aaron had a lot of very interesting and exciting stories to tell. I cannot wait to see what documentary he makes next. You can find Aaron's excellent documentary, There's No Such Thing as Ghosts, on most streaming platforms. Visit the film's official website for direct links, and for more info at ghostdocfilm.com. That's ghostdocfilm.com. You can like his film on Facebook at The Ghost Doc. Follow the film on Twitter and Instagram at Think Haunted. Of course, you can always find us at TalkingWeird.com. You can also visit our new Fortean hub site, charlesfort.org. There you can find not only the full Talking Weird episode archive, but an array of other Fortean content, as well as an extensive paranormal-themed t-shirt store, plus our new web series Haunted Jen and Fort Thought. If you haven't already, please like Talking Weird on Facebook and Instagram at Talking Weird Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to the podcast. We're available on most podcast platforms and YouTube. And if you enjoyed this episode of Talking Weird, please leave us a review. Dean and I would really appreciate it. Next week, make sure to join us for another conversational journey into the world's stranger realms. Until then, stay safe and keep it weird.